For reasons no one can fully explain, human history begins with silence. Not a quiet pause, but a vast, impossible void. Hundreds of thousands of years where our ancestors lived, struggled, survived, and yet left almost nothing behind. No stories, no tools advanced enough to trace, no remains that match the population models scientists know must have existed. It is as if a whole era of humanity was deliberately erased, leaving only a few scattered fragments to taunt us with the sense that something enormous is missing. This is the part of our history textbooks never talk about, the missing epoch where the archaeological record simply goes dark. We expect evolution to unfold in steps, each generation improving upon the last, leaving behind a trail of progress we can follow. But the deep past refuses to play by those rules. Entire technological traditions appear suddenly, with no prototypes or gradual development. Oldowan tools persist for hundreds of thousands of years unchanged, and then, without warning, more complex technologies surface as if a new mind arrived on Earth carrying knowledge no one else had. The transitions are too sharp, too abrupt, too clean. Nature doesn't leap like that, but our ancestors did. What troubles scientists most is not what we find, it's what we should find, but don't. Based on population size, climate stability, and migration patterns, humanity should have left behind mountains of artifacts. Instead, we find crumbs. A tooth here, a jawbone there, a handful of stone flakes scattered across continents. The fossil record of humans is so thin that some researchers openly admit it cannot be trusted as a timeline. Too many gaps, too many sudden disappearances, too many events that imply unexpected intelligence long before Homo sapiens were supposed to possess it. Some try to blame geology, erosion, volcanic destruction, rising oceans swallowing coastal settlements. Those explanations account for part of the silence, but not all. There are regions untouched by catastrophic change, places where evidence should be abundant yet remains stubbornly absent. These archaeological blind spots stretch so long and so consistently that chance cannot explain them. Something happened. Something big enough to scatter or erase the traces of entire populations. And then, DNA changed everything. When scientists sequenced the human genome, they discovered something no one predicted. Hidden inside us are genetic signatures from ancestors who do not appear anywhere in the fossil record. Unknown humans. Ghost lineages. Entire branches of our family tree that existed, interbred with us, and then vanished so completely that not a single confirmed bone has ever been found. They lived, died, struggled, adapted, and all we have left of them is molecular whispering, encoded in our cells like a memory we were never meant to keep. All of this forces a disturbing possibility. The story of humanity we know today is not the full story. It is the version written from the tiny fraction of evidence that survived. The lost epoch, the vast span of time where humans existed but history refuses to show them, might contain events, cultures, or even other kinds of humans radically different from anything we can imagine. If entire species could rise and disappear without leaving a trace, what else might have lived beside us? What innovations were born, forgotten, reinvented thousands of years later as if new? If the past is missing pages, then somewhere in those blank spaces lies a truth that could rewrite everything we think we know about our origins. And the deeper we look into those shadows, the more it feels like humanity's earliest chapters weren't just lost. They were never meant to be found. Yet the deeper scientists search, the more they realize the silence of the past isn't empty. It is patterned. Strange clues appear exactly where they shouldn't, as if the missing chapters of humanity occasionally break through the surface of time. In caves, sealed for hundreds of thousands of years, ashes from ancient hearths show signs of controlled fire far earlier than textbooks allow. At sites thought to belong to simple toolmakers, stone artifacts reveal planning, geometry, and a cognitive leap no one can explain. These discoveries don't fit neatly into the timeline. They jut out like broken pieces from a puzzle we no longer have the box for. Then there are the bones, rare, isolated, but deeply unsettling. A finger bone that resembles no known human species, a fragment of skull with proportions too odd, too advanced, or too primitive to belong where it was found. Every time a new piece surfaces, the scientific community braces for impact because each fragment threatens to rewrite another chapter of human evolution. And more often than not, the discovery ends in a conclusion researchers hate to admit. Unknown hominin. These unknowns aren't rare exceptions. They are clues to an entire world of humans who walked the earth without leaving a narrative. The genetic data reinforces this eerie truth. Around 1 to 4% of modern human DNA comes from Neanderthals, another portion from Denisovans. But beyond these, there are genetic signatures that don't match any known species, signatures that appear in populations across Africa, Asia, and even Oceania. Someone else lived among us. Someone we haven't found. Someone who, for reasons we cannot yet understand, disappeared so perfectly that only their genetic echo remains. Some researchers argue that climate cycles were ruthless editors of early human history. Vast droughts, sudden ice expansions, and violent volcanic winters could have crushed developing cultures before they left durable records. But even these events don't explain everything. Why do tool traditions flourish, vanish, then reappear thousands of years later as if rediscovered? Why do complex behaviors show up abruptly, then sink back into simplicity for long stretches? If evolution is gradual, why does human history behave like a heartbeat, surges of brilliance followed by silence? A few scholars quietly propose a more provocative idea, that there were once human groups with capabilities different from the ones we associate with early hominins. Not necessarily advanced civilizations, but lineages with unique cognitive strengths, problem solvers, navigators, tool makers, whose disappearance erased innovations that later re-emerged long after they were gone. If such groups existed, their absence in the fossil record would be less a mystery and more a terrifying reminder of how easily humanity can forget itself. Across continents, myths tell of the first people, beings who lived before the ancestors of today and vanished after a great darkness, a flood, or a fire from the sky. Most anthropologists dismiss these as symbolic stories, but sometimes myths survive because they contain fragments of memory older than archaeology. Perhaps they are distorted echoes of encounters between Homo sapiens and ghost species, whose presence shaped us in ways we still carry without understanding. What stands out most is the recurring pattern. Wherever we push the boundaries of our search, deeper caves, older sediments, more isolated genetic lineages, the past pushes back with contradictions. Every discovery answers one question, but raises 3 more. Every new species we identify implies others we still haven't found. The more certain we become about who we are, the more uncertain our origins appear. If humanity truly lived through ages that left almost no trace, then the greatest mystery isn't how those epochs were lost. It's what they contained. Cultures that rose and collapsed before the world could record them? Human species that shaped our evolution from the shadows? Knowledge gained, forgotten, then reinvented by descendants who had no idea they were repeating ancient footsteps? Somewhere in those missing pages lies the truth we've never been able to confront. Humans were not always alone on this earth, and the world they inhabited may have been far stranger and far more crowded than our history books dare to imagine. There is a period in human deep time so mysterious, so impossibly blank, that some researchers hesitate to speak of it as a gap at all. A gap implies something small, a missing line in a paragraph. But what humanity faces here is the absence of an entire volume. For nearly 300,000 years, longer than all of recorded history multiplied many times, our ancestors existed in a world we can barely reconstruct. And yet, this immense stretch of time offers almost nothing in return. It is as if humanity walked through a corridor of darkness, leaving behind no footprints. What we do know is unsettling. At the beginning of this vast interval, early humans had already spread across large portions of Africa and parts of Eurasia. They possessed fire, basic hunting strategies, and tool technologies that, while simple, showed clear signs of planning. Then the record fades. Cultures vanish. Innovation slows to a crawl. For hundreds of millennia, the archaeological layers remain painfully thin, a whisper instead of a story. Scientists have a name for this era, the Middle Pleistocene Void. But the word void does not capture the strangeness of what is missing. Evolution does not pause. Populations do not stop adapting. Brains do not remain static for hundreds of thousands of years. And yet, that is exactly what the artifacts suggest. Stagnation so prolonged that it defies the basic rhythm of human development. The contradiction is impossible to ignore. Even more confounding is what happens after the gap. Without any clear transitional evidence, early Homo sapiens emerge with behaviors that seem too advanced for the world they came from. Symbolic thinking, rapidly improved stone tools, social structures capable of supporting large groups. These leaps appear abruptly, with no developmental staircase beneath them. It is as if humanity woke from a long sleep not weaker, but sharper, as though ideas had been carried across the void without leaving any trace of their journey. This raises questions no one has been able to answer. Were there population collapses so severe that cultural memory was wiped clean again and again? Did earlier humans migrate through regions where preservation was impossible, leaving entire continents archaeologically silent? Or did other human species, those whose bones we still haven't found, play a role in shaping the minds that emerged on the other side of the gap? Excavations do occasionally reveal tantalizing signals. In some caves, microscopic traces of soot suggest controlled fire tens or even hundreds of thousands of years earlier than expected. At a handful of sites, stone tools appear with designs too deliberate to belong to the simplistic cultures typically assigned to this period. These anomalies hint that innovation may have flickered in and out of existence, never taking root long enough to leave a widespread legacy. But the greatest mystery is not the tools. It is the absence of bodies. During this 300,000-year stretch, millions of humans must have lived and died. Yet their bones are so rare that they seem almost mythical. Entire species could have risen, thrived, and vanished without leaving more than a few teeth behind. In fact, genetic evidence strongly suggests that unknown human lineages were alive during this period, mixing with our ancestors, influencing their evolution, shaping their future. But where are they? What kind of world did they inhabit? And why did it fail to survive long enough to be remembered? As new discoveries trickle in, often a single bone fragment at a time, the outlines of the gap blur rather than sharpen. Every find expands the landscape of what we do not know. it becomes harder to maintain the illusion that human history is a straight line. Instead, it begins to look like a series of rises and falls, lights and shadows, where knowledge is gained, lost, and rediscovered across unimaginable stretches of time. Whatever happened in that silent expanse, it fundamentally shaped the species we would become. And until we uncover its hidden chapters, the story of humanity remains incomplete, missing not just details, but the very foundation of our origins. What emerges from the edges of the 300,000-year gap is not a picture of primitive minds slowly learning to survive, but something far stranger. Evidence that intelligence, real, flexible, creative intelligence, may have appeared long before we ever thought possible. It surfaces not as a steady climb, but as isolated flashes of brilliance scattered across continents like forgotten sparks. Each spark appears abruptly, burns bright for a brief moment, then vanishes without explanation, leaving no evolutionary trail behind. One of the most striking examples arrives from Jebel Irhoud in Morocco, where fossils and tools dated to roughly 315,000 years ago show features astonishingly similar to early Homo sapiens. These people weren't supposed to exist yet, at least not with such advanced cranial structures and toolkits. Their stone points show deliberate shaping, symmetry, and efficiency that contradict the idea of a slow cognitive awakening. If these were our ancestors, they were far more capable than the archaeological record surrounding them suggests. Then, thousands of kilometers away, another anomaly surfaces. At Olorgesailie in Kenya, researchers uncovered pigment use, obsidian transport networks, and tools crafted from materials sourced tens of kilometers away, all dating to a period where humans were thought to be little more than opportunistic scavengers. The idea that prehistoric groups were intentionally moving volcanic glass across vast distances implies planning, social cooperation, and an understanding of the landscape that feels shockingly modern. This was no accidental behavior. This was strategy. And as if to complicate matters further, deep inside Wonderwerk Cave in South Africa, traces of controlled fire appear far older than any predicted timeline. The microscopic ash and burnt bone fragments suggest deliberate, repeated burning. Not a lightning strike, not a natural wildfire. These ancient inhabitants were tending flames hundreds of thousands of years before fire mastery should have been part of human life. Fire is a technology that fundamentally alters cognition, diet, sleep, and social bonds. If humans controlled it that early, everything about our developmental timeline shifts. The question becomes unavoidable. How could intelligence emerge, disappear, and then reemerge thousands of years later? Evolution doesn't forget, but cultures do. Technologies can be lost when populations shrink, when migrations tear communities apart, or when catastrophes shatter the fragile chain of knowledge between generations. A single bottleneck, a drought, a disease, a volcanic winter, any one of these could erase innovations before they had a chance to spread. Some researchers have begun to wonder whether multiple human species may have contributed to these moments of unexpected sophistication. If Homo sapiens weren't alone, if they shared the world with other smart, creative populations, then cultural cross-pollination could explain the sudden bursts of innovation that leave no developmental roots. Ideas may have spread between groups whose bones we have not yet discovered, or whose remains were destroyed long before our tools could reach them. But the most unsettling possibility is the simplest. Human intelligence may not have evolved in a straight line. It may have surged long before our species stabilized, rising in pockets of early populations that never grew large enough to leave an enduring mark. Entire lifetimes of learning, creativity, and cultural memory could have disappeared with the death of a single isolated community. Their innovations rediscovered tens of thousands of years later, would seem like miracles out of nowhere, when in truth, they were echoes of minds long forgotten. In the end, the evidence refuses to obey the neat categories we try to place it into. Every anomaly suggests that human cognition was far more complex, far more uneven, and far more ancient than our models allow. Instead of a slow ascent, humanity's early story looks more like waves crashing against the shore: advancement, collapse, rediscovery, loss. Intelligence flickering through deep time, surviving only in fragments. And somewhere within that 300,000-year darkness, there must have been people who thought, planned, understood, and created in ways that challenged everything we assume about our origins. We have only their traces. But even traces can change everything. Long before the rise of cities, agriculture, or written memory, humanity nearly vanished. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, biologically. Genetic data reveals that at several points in deep time, our species shrank to numbers so small that a single village today might outnumber the entire human population then. It is one of the most alarming truths hidden in our DNA. We are the descendants of survivors who crawled through evolutionary bottlenecks so narrow that humanity came within inches of disappearing forever. The most infamous of these events is tied to the Toba supervolcano eruption roughly 74,000 years ago, an explosion so immense it dimmed the skies, collapsed ecosystems, and plunged large parts of the planet into a volcanic winter. The ash layer from this eruption can be traced across continents, and for decades, scientists believed this catastrophe reduced humans to perhaps a few thousand breeding individuals. Yet when geneticists examined mitochondrial DNA, the picture that emerged grew even stranger. The bottleneck didn't align perfectly with Toba. It seemed deeper, stretching further back, as if humanity had already been dwindling before the eruption, perhaps during other environmental shocks we have yet to understand. But Toba is only one chapter in a much older, far more unsettling story. Around 900,000 years ago, a point far earlier than most discussions of human history ever reach, our ancestors encountered an even deadlier crash. Studies of effective population size reveal that humanity collapsed to as few as 1,280 individuals worldwide. That is not a society. It is a fragile cluster of families barely clinging to survival. For hundreds of thousands of years, this tiny population persisted in near isolation, bottlenecked so severely that an estimated 98% of all ancestral lineages disappeared forever. If any earlier human cultures, technologies, or even species existed before this collapse, almost all evidence of them, genetic or otherwise, would have been wiped from the record. This helps explain the faint, fragmented nature of the archaeological record surrounding these eras. When population sizes shrink, cultural memory erodes with terrifying speed. Skills vanish when the people who know them die without passing them on. Knowledge that once spanned continents can disappear in a single starving generation. And when the population rebounds centuries or millennia later, the survivors may rebuild their world with no memory of what came before. Yet something about these collapses remains deeply puzzling. Environmental changes alone don't fully account for their severity. The climate did shift dramatically during the mid-Pleistocene transition, but not so uniformly or catastrophically that every human group should have declined at once. This suggests the presence of another force, perhaps disease, food scarcity triggered by complex ecological changes, or competition with other human species we have yet to identify. Whatever the cause, the result was the same. The tree of humanity was pruned until only a single fragile branch remained. And woven through this story is an eerie implication. If other human species lived alongside our ancestors during these collapses, as genetic evidence strongly suggests, most of them must also have faced extinction-level pressures. Yet the timelines of their disappearances do not always match ours. Some species vanished earlier, others later, which raises a haunting possibility. Were there survivors we never found? Did some lineages endure in isolation, leaving no fossil record but contributing genetic traces to us long after their physical presence vanished? The more we decode our DNA, the more it becomes clear that the human story is not one of steady growth, but of repeated near erasure. Time and again, our species passed through the narrowest of evolutionary gates, shedding diversity, culture, and entire worlds of experience each time. What remains in us today is only what survived those fires. And yet, hidden in that surviving genetic code is something no one expected. Evidence that humanity did not walk alone through these bottlenecks, and that the shadows of other beings still linger in us. When geneticists first realized that modern humans carried DNA from Neanderthals and Denisovans, it rewrote the story of our origins. Suddenly, we were not the isolated, triumphant species we imagined. We were part of a tangled web of human lineages, meeting, mixing, competing, and sharing the planet in ways no one had anticipated. But those discoveries were only the beginning. Once researchers examined specific populations more closely, they found something far more mysterious. Large segments of DNA that did not match any known species. Not Neanderthal, not Denisovan, not Homo sapiens. These sequences came from someone else entirely, someone we have never seen in the fossil record. The idea was shocking. To confirm it, scientists compared genomes from Africa, Melanesia, Asia, and Europe. Again and again the pattern repeated. Humans today carry genetic fragments from at least one, and probably several, unknown hominin groups. These ghost species, as they came to be called, must have lived beside us, walked the same earth, hunted the same prey, and at some point shared families with our ancestors. Yet not a single confirmed bone has ever been recovered. They vanished so completely that all that remains is a faint molecular fingerprint. The implications are staggering. If these unknown groups contributed to our DNA, they must have been widespread and successful enough to encounter and integrate with multiple human populations. But why do we find no fossils? Were they living in regions with poor preservation? Did their remains erode, sink, or burn in catastrophic events? Or were they simply so few in number and their lives so fragile that almost nothing survived the weight of time? Genetic modeling paints a haunting picture. At least one of these ghost lineages diverged from our ancestors more than 1 million years ago, surviving through multiple population collapses and climate disasters, eventually meeting Homo sapiens long after many supposedly dominant species had died out. They may have been small, elusive populations, inhabiting remote environments or ecological niches far from the paths where we typically search for fossils. Some models suggest they lived in Africa, where heat and humidity destroy bones rapidly. Others point toward Southeast Asia, a region where hominin discoveries routinely overturn long-held assumptions. Whatever their origin, these ghost species were not insignificant. The genes they left behind influence our immune response, our metabolism, and even how our bodies adapt to altitude and climate. Some sequences appear beneficial, suggesting that these unknown humans had traits that helped our ancestors survive. Others are neutral or still poorly understood. But all of them tell the same story. We are hybrids, shaped not by a single lineage, but by encounters with humans we no longer remember. Occasionally, the archaeological record hints at their existence. a strange molar from the Philippines, too small and too derived for Homo erectus, but too primitive for modern humans. A jawbone from Tibet with Denisovan affinities, but features that don't fit any known species. Isolated skull fragments in West Africa that defy classification. Each discovery feels like a whisper from a forgotten people, quickly swallowed by time before we can fully understand it. The absence of their skeletons raises another unsettling possibility. Perhaps these lineages were absorbed into Homo sapiens so completely that their physical distinctions disappeared. Interbreeding, generation after generation, could have blended features until nothing recognizable remained. Their bodies vanished, but their genes survived, quietly influencing the future long after their cultures faded into extinction. Yet the question lingers. If so many ghost species shaped us, how many more existed beyond our current genetic horizon? How many left no trace at all, no fossils, no DNA, nothing but the consequences of their existence woven invisibly into our story? The deeper scientists look, the clearer it becomes that human evolution was never linear. It was a branching forest of species, many of which lived and died without ever entering the textbooks. We were not the inevitable pinnacle of that forest. We were simply the last survivors of a world filled with minds that history forgot. And somewhere in the shadows of that forgotten world lies a greater mystery still. What happened to all the others? Across the ancient world, long before writing or monuments or even stable tribes, humanity expressed itself through one enduring language: stone. Every flake struck, every edge sharpened, every tool shaped was a signature of the minds that crafted it. Yet when archaeologists lay these artifacts across a timeline that stretches back millions of years, something strange emerges. Not the steady progression we expect, but rhythms of appearance and disappearance, brilliance and silence, innovation and sudden collapse. Entire technological traditions rise, flourish for tens of thousands of years, and then vanish as if swept from the earth. The Acheulean hand axe is one of the most iconic symbols of early human skill, crafted with symmetry, intention, and a level of refinement that suggests real cognitive depth. For over 1 million years, this technology dominated Africa, Europe, and Asia. Then, in multiple regions, it simply stops. No gradual transition, no meaningful decline. It just ends. In some places, it was replaced by more advanced tools. In others, it was followed by long stretches where tool-making seems to regress or disappear entirely. How could a technique so widespread, so successful, vanish so abruptly without leaving signs of struggle or transformation? Archaeologists once assumed climate change forced these shifts, but the evidence does not cooperate. The disappearance of Acheulean tools does not always align with major environmental disruptions. In fact, some regions show stable climates precisely when their tool traditions collapse. This raises a more perplexing question. Were these changes driven not by nature but by humans themselves, or by interactions with other human species whose presence has not yet been documented? The Oldowan tradition, even older than Acheulean, presents a similar enigma. Its simple flakes and choppers persist for hundreds of thousands of years, appearing almost identical across vast distances. This consistency defies expectations. Populations change, landscapes shift, needs evolve, yet Oldowan tools remain frozen in time until, suddenly, they don't. New technologies appear with no clear evolutionary path linking the old to the new. It's not a smooth transition, it's a rupture. Adding to the confusion, some sites show that different tool traditions coexisted for long periods. Two neighboring groups might use entirely different technologies for reasons we cannot decipher. Was this cultural preference? Lack of communication? or evidence that different human species lived side by side, each following its own technological logic. The patterns hint at a prehistoric world far more diverse and interconnected than we ever imagined. Even more baffling is the evidence of lost knowledge. In several regions, sophisticated tools appear briefly, objects requiring planning and skill, only to vanish, replaced by simpler forms. This regression is hard to explain. Innovation is rare in early prehistory. Losing innovation should be even rarer. Yet the archaeological record suggests it happened repeatedly. A group might develop or encounter a breakthrough, but if the population later shrank or migrated, that knowledge could vanish in a single generation. Innovation depended not just on intelligence, but on continuity and stability, luxuries our ancestors rarely had. Some researchers have begun asking whether external forces played a role. Could other hominin species with different cognitive strengths have introduced or removed technologies as they moved in and out of contact with Homo sapiens? Could cultural exchange, whether cooperative or competitive, have shaped the rise and fall of tool traditions? If ghost species existed, as genetics suggests, they may also have carried ghost technologies, innovations that left no fossil record except their sudden, unexplained appearances. The deeper we explore these lost traditions, the clearer it becomes that early humanity did not follow a single trajectory. The landscape of prehistory was alive with experimentation, fragmentation, and disappearance. Technologies were born, forgotten, rediscovered, then lost again as populations changed, collided, or vanished. Behind every tool lies a story, not only of how it was made, but of the people who carried it, the world they faced, and the mysteries their passing left behind. And sometimes, those stories end not because the people died, but because something erased the trail they left behind. If the abrupt endings of ancient tool traditions suggest missing cultures, then the Earth itself may explain where many of those missing worlds went. During the last ice age, sea levels were not merely lower, they were dramatically lower, exposing entire continents of land now hidden beneath the waves. Nearly 20 million square kilometers of habitable terrain, more than the size of modern Europe, lies underwater today. Whatever humans built, hunted, invented, or remembered on those vanished coasts is gone, erased not by war or catastrophe, but by the slow, relentless rising of the oceans. Consider Sundaland, the vast landmass that once connected Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, and the Philippines. For tens of thousands of years it was home to rivers, forests, plains, and likely human populations large enough to sustain complex traditions. Yet the moment Ice Age glaciers melted, Sundaland drowned. If entire cultures flourished there, cultures capable of mixing with early Homo sapiens or even creating unique technologies, we may never find more than scattered hints on the remaining islands. The archaeological silence in Southeast Asia may not be a gap in human story, but a story swallowed whole by the sea. Far to the north, another lost world lies beneath what is now the Bering Strait. Beringia was not a narrow land bridge, but a massive region teeming with life, stretching from Siberia to Alaska. It served as a refuge during Ice Age extremes, mild when surrounding lands froze, fertile when other regions starved. Human ancestors may have lived there for thousands of years, isolated from other populations, forming cultures or even lineages that existed nowhere else. When rising seas flooded Beringia, those worlds disappeared, leaving behind nothing but genetic traces and speculative maps. And then there is Doggerland, the fertile plain that once connected Britain to mainland Europe. Archaeologists know it was populated. Stone tools, bones, and traces of settlements wash ashore after storms. But the heart of Doggerland, the villages, hunting grounds, rituals, and migrations that must have taken place there, is now under 40 meters of cold North Sea water. Whatever technologies these people used, whether they invented unique tools or preserved traditions older than their neighbors, are effectively unreachable. When a culture drowns, its memory dies with it. These submerged lands were not barren. They were prime territory. Coastlines rich in seafood, plains filled with megafauna, river systems capable of supporting large groups. If human innovation began along these coasts, as many anthropologists now suspect, then the earliest chapters of our technological story may be underwater. Fire pits, shelters, fishing technologies, even early symbolic art could lie buried beneath silt and salt, unseen and unreachable. The silence in the archaeological record may reflect not the absence of culture, but the absence of access. The ocean is not the only eraser of history. Glaciers, too, bury worlds alive. During glacial maximums, vast regions of Europe, Asia, and North America were smothered under kilometers of ice. Any human presence there, no matter how skilled or numerous, would have been crushed, ground into dust, and carried away by meltwater. Later populations would return to a landscape stripped clean, with no knowledge of who came before them. In some regions, the cycle repeated multiple times. People arrive, the ice advances, all traces vanish. To a future archaeologist, these regions appear uninhabited for tens of thousands of years. What emerges from all this is a picture of prehistory shaped as much by geography as by human behavior. Technologies and cultures did not just evolve or disappear, they were drowned, frozen, eroded, or buried under shifting landscapes. If we could drain the oceans or peel back the glaciers, the human record might look unrecognizable. It might reveal lineages we never knew existed, inventions far older than we believed possible, or interactions between human groups that today seem fantastical. The greatest mysteries of human origins may lie not in deserts or caves or ancient river valleys, but in places we cannot reach. Vast, forgotten homelands where humanity lived entire lifetimes in worlds now erased from the face of the earth. Long before deserts looked the way we know them today, vast portions of earth were green, alive with rivers, wetlands, grasslands, and the animal migrations that followed them. Our ancestors thrived in these environments, hunting along lake shores, gathering in shaded valleys, and building seasonal territories shaped by the rhythm of rain. But then, again and again, the climate shifted. Slowly at first, then with terrifying speed. Forests thinned, rivers evaporated, and the fertile lands that nourished early humans fractured into dust. Archaeologists call these turning points aridification events, periods when entire ecosystems dried out and vanished. The consequences for humanity were catastrophic. One of the most dramatic examples lies beneath the sands of the Sahara. Today, it is a scorching desert stretching across an entire continent. But for most of human prehistory, it was a lush expanse of savannas, wetlands, and lakes larger than some modern seas. Hippos, crocodiles, elephants, and early humans lived side by side in a world that would seem unreal to us now. Stone tools, rock art, and traces of ancient settlements reveal that people did more than survive there. They thrived. And then, roughly every 20,000 years, the rains retreated. The monsoon system collapsed. The green Sahara dried, cracked, and transformed into the vast desert we see today. Whatever cultures existed there were forced to flee or perish, leaving behind scattered hints of their presence without the continuity needed to preserve their stories. This pulsing cycle of green and desert may explain why early human innovations appear and disappear so abruptly. A thriving population might develop new tools, social strategies, or forms of symbolic expression, only for those advancements to dissolve when climate change fractured their habitat. people scattered into smaller groups, knowledge fragmented, and technologies that once seemed promising were abandoned as survival became a daily struggle. The archaeological record reflects these fractures, long stretches of silence where nothing seems to advance, followed by sudden bursts of creativity when the climate stabilized again. But the Sahara was not alone. Across East Africa, regions once rich with lakes shrank into isolated basins. In places like the Turkana Basin, water levels rose and fell so violently that entire communities were forced to relocate multiple times within a single lifetime. Each displacement risked erasing traditions that had taken generations to refine. The landscapes on which human memory depended were unstable, and with instability comes forgetting. Even the Rift Valley, often described as the cradle of humanity, was shaped by cycles of drought so severe that they pushed early humans into new territories, altering migration routes and severing cultural connections. As climates shifted, resource competition intensified. Large animals migrated or died out. Plant diversity collapsed. Groups that once lived in abundance were suddenly surrounded by scarcity. These pressures likely triggered conflicts, merging populations, or the disappearance of entire lineages, events that left genetic signatures but few physical traces. In such unstable environments, preserving cultural knowledge was nearly impossible. Stories, techniques, and identities vanished as quickly as the lakes that once sustained them. In some cases, aridification created landscapes so harsh that they became blank spaces in the archaeological record. The Arabian Peninsula, for example, was periodically transformed from a humid paradise into an unforgiving wasteland. Yet during the wet phases, it served as a corridor for human migration, a stage for encounters between species, and possibly a birthplace of innovations we cannot yet see. When the rains faded, those worlds vanished beneath shifting dunes, erasing evidence more thoroughly than any catastrophe could. These cycles reveal a powerful truth. Climate did not merely influence human evolution, it sculpted it. The rise and fall of ecosystems created rise and fall in human complexity, creativity, and connection. Civilizations cannot form without stability, and early humans rarely had that luxury. They lived within a climate rhythm too immense and too violent to preserve their stories. What we call gaps in human history may not be gaps at all, but the scars of a world that repeatedly forced humanity to begin again. As the great drying events reshaped continents, the world entered an age of instability so intense that it left permanent scars on humanity. Mega-droughts, periods of extreme, prolonged dryness, swept across Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, sometimes lasting centuries. Lakes that had supported generations of human life shrank to muddy hollows or vanished entirely. Forests retreated, grasslands collapsed. Animals that once relied on these ecosystems either migrated or died, and with them disappeared the dependable food sources early humans depended on. In the wake of these environmental upheavals, entire human groups were forced into desperate journeys across unfamiliar terrain, creating migrations so ancient and vast that only genetics remembers them. One of the most dramatic examples occurred around 130,000 to 70,000 years ago, when a series of megadroughts struck East Africa, one of humanity's primary homelands. Vast regions became nearly uninhabitable. Waterholes dried into cracked basins, and the fertile highlands grew thin and brittle. These harsh conditions are believed to have triggered some of the earliest major migrations of Homo sapiens. Groups that once lived in relatively stable territories were pushed toward new lands, following shrinking river systems or fleeing into coastal refuges where food was still available. As they moved, they left behind cultural traditions that could not survive the trauma and dislocation. But megadroughts did more than drive migration. They tested human resilience in ways that shaped our species forever. Small communities, isolated by failing landscapes, struggled to maintain social networks. Knowledge passed down through generations fractured as elders died and families splintered. Languages shifted or disappeared. The more fragile aspects of culture, rituals, symbolic art, long-term planning, faded under the weight of mere survival. Innovation requires stability, but stability was a luxury the climate did not allow. The extinctions that followed were not limited to humans. Megafauna across multiple continents began to vanish as the environment deteriorated. Giant antelopes, ancient bovids, and other grazing animals lost their habitats. Their disappearance rippled through food chains, reducing hunting opportunities and placing even greater pressure on human groups already pushed to the brink. Some anthropologists believe that early humans may have adapted by shifting toward new diets, shellfish, roots, or small, fast-breeding animals. These dietary changes may have shaped everything from tooth structure to brain development, suggesting that climate pressure literally rewired the human lineage. Yet the most profound impact of megadroughts may lie in the encounters they triggered. As once distant populations were compressed into shrinking habitable zones, humans who had not seen one another for tens of thousands of years suddenly shared the same riverbanks or coastlines. Some met peacefully, exchanging tools, stories, or mates. Others likely clashed, competition sharpening into conflict as resources dwindled. Genetic studies point to surprising periods of interbreeding among archaic humans during these climatic crises. When landscapes shrink, species meet, and when species meet, they inevitably shape each other. These interactions help explain why certain regions show sudden bursts of innovation. Reduced territories forced humans to build stronger social strategies. Information spread more quickly because isolation was no longer possible. Coastal refuges, like those along the Horn of Africa or the Arabian Peninsula, may have served as crucibles of creativity, where groups experimented with new technologies or survival strategies out of sheer necessity. When the climate finally eased, these innovations spread outward with the expanding populations, creating the illusion of sudden cognitive leaps in the archaeological record. But the record still shows gaps, periods where human presence seems to vanish completely. These blank spaces may represent moments when populations dwindled to levels too small to leave lasting marks, surviving only through narrow genetic lineages that eventually repopulated the world. The silence in the earth, the absence of tools or bones, does not always mean humans were gone. Sometimes it means they lived in numbers too small, too desperate, or too transient for time to preserve. In the story of human evolution, megadroughts were not side events. They were engines of transformation. They erased worlds, created new ones, pushed humans across continents, and shaped who we became. And long after the rains returned, the echoes of those crises remained encoded in our bodies, our migrations, and the faint, fragile footprints we left behind. For hundreds of thousands of years, Homo sapiens were just one of many human species scattered across the globe, clever, adaptable, but far from exceptional. Neanderthals built shelters and mastered fire long before we appeared. Denisovans thrived in mountainous environments modern humans struggled to endure. Other archaic humans carved tools, hunted large animals, and navigated harsh landscapes with skills comparable to our earliest ancestors. And then, within a geological blink, everything changed. A single species, ours, surged forward, expanded across continents, and reshaped the planet so completely that every other human lineage vanished. The question that has haunted researchers ever since is simple. Why us, and why so suddenly? The archaeological timeline shows a moment where Homo sapiens begins to behave differently. Tools become more refined, more varied, more specialized. Art appears, not crude scratches, but deliberate engravings, beads, pigments, and symbolic markings that suggest minds capable of abstraction. Social structures shift as well. Groups grow larger, networks expand, and knowledge begins to flow between distant communities. Something fundamental changed within the human brain or within the human world, tipping the balance in our favor. But the strangest part is that this transformation does not emerge gradually. It explodes. Innovations cluster tightly in time, appearing almost simultaneously across regions separated by thousands of kilometers. In Africa, early art and blade tools flourish. In the Levant, humans begin crafting ornaments and engaging in long-distance trade. In Europe, modern humans arrive with technologies Neanderthals had never seen: bone tools, advanced projectiles, and adaptable survival strategies. It is as if a switch flipped somewhere inside Homo sapiens, unlocking abilities that had lain dormant for millennia. Some researchers point to genetic changes as the catalyst. A cluster of genes involved in brain development, social cognition, and language appears to have undergone rapid evolution during this period. These mutations may have enhanced memory, communication, or problem-solving, traits that snowball in their effectiveness when shared through culture. The birth of structured language, in particular, could explain the exponential increase in human capability. Once ideas could be described clearly, transmitted accurately, and preserved across generations, knowledge became cumulative rather than fragile. But genetics alone cannot explain the suddenness of the shift. Many of the relevant mutations existed long before the archaeological record changes. The potential was present, but something was needed to activate it. That something may have been contact with other human species. Encounters with Neanderthals, Denisovans, and other archaic populations likely introduced new genes, new techniques, and new perspectives. Interbreeding may have accelerated adaptation, while cultural exchange, whether peaceful or competitive, pushed Homo sapiens to refine and expand their abilities. Environmental pressure also played a critical role. Climate volatility created bursts of innovation by forcing humans to adapt rapidly or perish. Those who survived were the ones who could plan, communicate, cooperate, and imagine solutions beyond immediate survival. Natural selection favored minds that could think ahead, strategize, and build complex social bonds. In this crucible of stress and scarcity, cognition evolved not as a luxury, but as a necessity. Yet even these explanations leave gaps. Why did Homo sapiens succeed where Neanderthals, equally intelligent and resourceful, ultimately failed? Why did we expand into every ecological niche, from deserts to tundra to islands across the ocean? Some anthropologists suggest that the answer lies in our willingness to form large, interconnected networks. While other human species lived in relatively isolated groups, Homo sapiens built alliances, traded over long distances, and exchanged knowledge widely. Ideas spread faster than individuals, weaving a web of innovation that no other species could match. Whatever the cause, the effect was irreversible. Once Homo sapiens reached this threshold of cognitive and social complexity, the world began to tilt in our favor. Other human species, however capable, could not compete with a lineage whose strength came not from muscles or specific adaptations, but from shared imagination. From that point onward, humanity followed a path that no other species, past or present, could rival. But our rise carries a shadow. If we gained our dominance through sudden transformation, what triggered that leap? And what lost worlds, lost species, or lost knowledge might have shaped us before their traces vanished into the dark? For most of human existence, we were not alone. The world was shared by an array of human species, each adapted to different landscapes, each carrying its own intelligence, strengths, and mysteries. They were our competitors, our neighbors, and in some cases, our mates. And yet today, every one of them is gone. Their disappearance, so complete and so synchronized, remains one of the great enigmas of prehistory. We inherited the Earth, but not because we were destined to. We inherited it because something happened that removed every other branch of the human family tree. The most familiar of these lost relatives are the Neanderthals. Far from brutish cave dwellers, they were skilled hunters, crafted sophisticated tools, used fire with mastery, and cared for their injured. Their brains were as large as ours, sometimes larger. They decorated bodies with pigments, created symbolic marks, and buried their dead. For hundreds of thousands of years, they thrived in Europe and Western Asia. And then, within a few thousand years of Homo sapiens' arrival, they were gone. The causes, competition, climate change, interbreeding, disease, only deepen. The mystery, because none alone explains the rapid, total collapse. Denisovans are even more puzzling. Known mostly from a finger bone, a few teeth, and faint genetic signatures, they likely spanned a range from Siberia to Southeast Asia. They lived at high altitudes modern humans struggled to tolerate and carried adaptations we still benefit from today. Yet their entire world left barely a trace in the fossil record. How could a species whose DNA persists in millions of people leave so few physical remains? Their story is a whisper on the edge of what science can recover. But the most uncanny among our lost competitors are the smaller-bodied species, Homo floresiensis from Indonesia and Homo luzonensis from the Philippines. These humans, barely a meter tall, possessed brains the size of grapefruits, yet their stone tools show precision and planning. They hunted dwarf elephants and large birds, survived volcanic eruptions, and adapted to island ecosystems in ways that defy expectations. Their existence alone challenges the assumption that intelligence scales strictly with brain size. Even stranger, they survived far longer than anyone expected, perhaps until as recently as 50,000 years ago, overlapping with modern humans for thousands of years. Other enigmatic groups appear briefly in the archaeological record and then fade into obscurity. Homo naledi in South Africa displayed surprisingly complex behavior while retaining primitive anatomical features. They deliberately deposited their dead deep inside cave systems, a behavior once thought exclusive to modern humans. Yet their tools, camps, and daily lives remain largely invisible, leaving open questions about how they interacted with the broader human world. If all these species coexisted with Homo sapiens, what happened to them? Did competition for resources escalate into conflict? Did climate swings disproportionately affect them? Or did interbreeding dilute them into our lineage until their distinct physical traits disappeared? Some researchers suggest a more unsettling possibility, that contact between species created imbalances in knowledge transmission. If modern humans had more efficient communication or more flexible social networks, they may have been able to adopt useful ideas faster, spreading advantages that others could not match. But there is another, quieter explanation hidden in the genetic record. Some extinct species did not vanish entirely. They live on in us. Neanderthal DNA shapes our immune systems. Denisovan genes help people in Tibet survive at high altitudes. Other unknown lineages contributed sequences that influence metabolism and neurological development. In a sense, these lost competitors were not defeated. Their legacy became part of what we now call Homo sapiens. Yet the fossil record shows a far harsher truth. In many regions, the arrival of modern humans coincides with the disappearance of other species in a pattern too sharp to ignore. Whether through direct conflict, competition for prey, ecological disruption, or disease, The rise of one lineage paralleled the fall of all others. By the time the last ice age ended, every other human species had vanished. Their tools lay abandoned. Their stories died with them. Their memory survived only where their genes endured. And this raises a haunting question. If so many human species once lived beside us, how many more species we have not yet found, species whose bones now lie beneath oceans or deserts, shared our world before fading into the dark? Long before agriculture, before the first villages or carved monuments, groups of Ice Age humans lived with a sophistication that defies the expectations of modern science. For decades, prehistory was painted as a slow climb from crude survival toward complexity. But the deeper archaeologists dig, the more they uncover signs that ancient humans were capable of innovations far earlier and far more abruptly than anyone imagined. These were not simple hunter-gatherers drifting across frozen landscapes. They were skilled toolmakers, artists, navigators, and thinkers whose achievements flicker through the archaeological record like flashes of light in an age of darkness. One of the most startling discoveries comes from Siberia, where tiny, intricately carved bone and ivory tools, needles with eyes, delicate awls, beads polished with precision, appear as early as 40,000 years ago. The craftsmanship is so refined that some researchers initially doubted the dates, believing they must belong to far later cultures. But the evidence held. Whoever made these objects possessed extraordinary manual dexterity, aesthetic awareness, and long-term planning. This was not a population merely surviving the cold. They were mastering it. Across Europe, the story is similar. The people of the Aurignacian and Gravettian cultures produced blade technologies so advanced that modern machinists have studied their flaking patterns. They constructed shelters from mammoth bones, engineered spear throwers to increase hunting range, and shaped figurines whose symbolism remains mysterious even today. The famous Venus figurines, with their exaggerated features and carefully smoothed surfaces, suggest not only artistic expression, but a shared cultural language that stretched across thousands of kilometers. These were not isolated sparks of creativity. They were part of something organized, intentional, and far-reaching. But some of the most remarkable evidence does not come from tools or sculptures. It comes from movement. The Pleistocene landscape was harsh, unpredictable, and often deadly. Yet humans traveled astonishing distances, crossing mountain ranges, navigating river systems, and exploring coastlines that required a deep understanding of seasonal patterns. In places like Australia and New Guinea, the presence of early humans implies seafaring abilities far earlier than expected. They would have needed not only boats, but the knowledge to build them, maintain them, and coordinate group migrations across open water. Such skills do not evolve independently in scattered bands. They require communication, shared strategies, and collective planning. Even hunting during this era reflects surprising intelligence. Sites in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East show evidence of sophisticated drive lanes, pit traps, and cooperative strategies involving dozens of individuals. These were coordinated events, requiring timing, leadership, and trust. Traits that mirror those of far later societies. A single successful mammoth hunt could sustain a community for weeks, but achieving such a feat demanded teamwork on a scale rarely attributed to Ice Age humans. Yet the archaeological record is inconsistent. These bursts of complexity appear suddenly, burn bright for several millennia, and then fade, replaced by simpler tools or less elaborate cultural expressions. It is as if humanity kept discovering its own potential, then losing it. Climate change played a role, forcing groups to shrink, adapt, or migrate. But climate alone cannot explain why knowledge was forgotten rather than modified. Something else disrupted the continuity. Perhaps population bottlenecks, isolation, or the disappearance of key groups erased these advancements before they could spread. A deeper mystery lingers. How much of this early brilliance remains hidden? Vast parts of the Pleistocene world lie beneath oceans, glaciers, and eroded plains. Coastal sites from Ice Age migrations are underwater. Inland sites may have been destroyed by advancing ice sheets. Entire chapters of innovation may have vanished forever, leaving only scattered reminders of a world where humans were far more capable than we assume. These Ice Age cultures were not anomalies. They were glimpses into a forgotten spectrum of human potential, one that challenges the tidy narrative of linear progress. Their tools, art, and journeys reveal minds that understood the world deeply, even if their stories were lost to time. And the further we follow these traces, the clearer it becomes. The Pleistocene was not an age of primitive survivors, but a stage for humans whose ingenuity rivaled our own, only to vanish without explanation. As the Ice Age advanced and retreated in its relentless rhythm, the world's great animals, creatures that had shaped ecosystems for millions of years, began to disappear. Mammoths, giant sloths, woolly rhinoceroses, cave lions, giant kangaroos, and towering birds all vanished in a geological instant. Their absence reshaped entire continents, and woven into this extinction story is an unsettling pattern. Wherever these megafauna vanished, human cultures changed as well, often abruptly, as if the disappearance of these animals struck at the core of the societies that depended on them. For decades, scientists debated what caused this mass extinction. Some blamed climate change. Others pointed to human hunting. But neither explanation works alone. Climate had fluctuated many times before without wiping out these animals. Early humans had hunted megafauna for tens of thousands of years without causing collapse. Something different happened at the end of the Pleistocene, a convergence of pressures that erased giants from the earth and left devastating ripple effects on the people who once lived alongside them. In some regions, the timeline aligns too perfectly to ignore. In North America, mammoths and mastodons decline just as Paleo-Indian populations expand. Yet, in other places, like parts of Siberia and Australia, the extinctions occur long before humans arrive in significant numbers. The pattern defies a simple narrative. Instead, it suggests a world in flux, one where climate instability, shrinking habitats, and the arrival of highly adaptive human groups combined to push ecosystems past their tipping points. The loss of megafauna was not merely ecological, it was cultural. For Ice Age humans, these animals were more than prey. They were the backbone of survival strategies that had evolved over generations. Mammoths provided food, shelter materials, tools, clothing, and even fuel from their fat and bones. Giant birds offered feathers, protein, and symbolic significance. When these creatures disappeared, the human groups that depended on them faced immediate crisis. Many were forced to abandon their traditional technologies and hunting practices. Entire cultural identities collapsed along with their prey. Archaeological layers reflect this turmoil with eerie clarity. Elaborate mammoth bone dwellings in Eastern Europe suddenly disappear. Complex hunting traps fall out of use. Art styles change dramatically as animals central to spiritual and symbolic life vanish from the landscape. Some human groups migrated, others dwindled. A few adapted with remarkable resilience, shifting their diets and inventing new tools. But many traditions died, leaving gaps in the archaeological record that mirror the ecological emptiness left behind. And then there are the anomalies, regions where megafauna survived thousands of years longer than expected. On Wrangel Island in the Arctic, dwarf mammoths lived until just 4,000 years ago, long after the pyramids of Egypt were built. In parts of Australia and New Guinea, Giant marsupials persisted well into the Holocene. These isolated survivors raise an unspoken question. If these animals endured in remote refuges, might human cultures tied to them have survived as well, only to vanish without leaving a trace? The role of Homo sapiens in these extinctions remains a topic of passionate debate. Some argue that advanced hunting technologies, projectile weapons, coordinated strategies, fire manipulation, gave modern humans an advantage no previous species possessed. Others suggest that indirect effects, such as altering vegetation through burning or disrupting predator-prey relationships, led to cascading collapses. But perhaps the most intriguing possibility is that the impact of humans varied across regions, interacting with local climates and ecosystems in ways we still do not fully understand. What is certain is that the disappearance of megafauna reshaped the human world. It forced migrations across continents, sparked innovations in fishing, gathering, and small game hunting, and created new cultural pathways that ultimately influenced the rise of agriculture and settled life. The extinction of giants marked the end of one world and the fragile beginning of another. Yet the deeper mystery persists. Why did these extinctions align so closely with major cultural shifts? Why did some human traditions flourish afterward while others vanished entirely? And what lost stories lie buried in that moment when Earth's great animals fell silent, taking with them the cultures that once depended on their thundering presence? Long before Homo sapiens dominated the planet, the world was alive with other kinds of humans, beings who looked like us in some ways and utterly different in others. But among them, a few stand out, not because of what we know, but because of what we cannot explain. They seem to emerge suddenly in the archaeological record, as if stepping out of the dark with no clear ancestors, no developmental trail, and no gradual evolution linking them to the species around them. They appeared, lived, and vanished so abruptly that even the most seasoned researchers admit these humans should not exist. Take Homo naledi, discovered deep within the Rising Star cave system in South Africa. Their anatomy is a jigsaw puzzle. Shoulders like an ape, hands suited for tool use, feet built for walking, and a brain scarcely half the size of ours. Yet the most shocking discovery was not their bones, but their behavior. Naledi individuals were found in chambers so inaccessible that only skilled climbers with modern equipment can reach them. The arrangement suggests intentional placement of the dead, behavior once thought exclusive to Homo sapiens. How could a species with such a small brain possess such symbolic or ritualistic complexity? Evolutionary models offer no comfortable answers. Then there is Homo floresiensis, the so-called hobbit of Indonesia. Standing barely a meter tall, with a brain roughly the size of a chimpanzee's, they crafted stone tools with remarkable accuracy and hunted dwarf elephants across a volcanic island. Their survival hints at advanced planning, cooperation, and adaptability. Even more perplexing, their ancestors remain unknown. They do not fit neatly into the Homo erectus lineage, nor do they resemble any African hominin. Their sudden appearance suggests either an evolutionary path we have never seen or one we have completely lost. A similar mystery unfolds in the Philippines with Homo luzonensis, a species that displays a mix of traits from different eras of human evolution. Their teeth resemble those of much older hominins, while their bones show adaptations unknown in any other species. They may be descendants of an early migration out of Africa long before Homo sapiens appeared. Or they may represent a branch of humanity that evolved in isolation for hundreds of thousands of years, leaving almost no trace across the vast Asian continent. These species challenge the very structure of the human family tree. They do not sit neatly on existing branches. They force new ones to be drawn. And yet, They appear so suddenly, with no clear transitional fossils to guide the narrative. It is as if entire evolutionary stories unfolded in remote corners of the world and left behind only their final chapters. Even stranger is how long some of these species survived. Floresiensis may have lived until just 50,000 years ago, overlapping with modern humans for millennia. Luzonensis may have persisted even longer. Homo naledi, once believed to be ancient, now appears surprisingly young, potentially existing at the same time that Homo sapiens were already spreading across Africa. Multiple human species coexisted far more recently and far more widely than the traditional story allows. What makes these discoveries so difficult to reconcile is the fragmented nature of the evidence. Often, researchers are working with only a few bones, a handful of teeth, or a tiny cave system that hints at a much larger world now lost. The regions where these species lived, tropical islands, deep caves, humid forests, are notoriously poor at preserving fossils. Entire populations may have lived and died in environments that erase bone faster than archaeology can find it. And so, every new discovery feels like a message from a forgotten past. Humans were not a single story, but many. Some branches thrived, others survived in shadows. A few evolved in ways we struggle to understand, revealing that intelligence, adaptability, and cultural behavior were not innovations unique to our lineage. These mysterious humans appeared out of nowhere and vanished just as suddenly. But the question that troubles researchers most is not how they lived. It's how many more species like them might have existed, leaving no trace at all. If these forgotten human species appeared out of nowhere, the deeper mystery is what happened when we finally met them. The world of the late Pleistocene was not a vacant stage waiting for Homo sapiens to arrive. It was already inhabited by diverse human beings with their own traditions, tools, and territories. Wherever our ancestors traveled, they encountered others who looked familiar, yet wholly different, carrying knowledge, instincts, and adaptations shaped by evolutionary paths we no longer understand. These meetings were not rare. They were inevitable, and they left marks on us that go far beyond DNA. Scattered archaeological sites contain hints of these encounters, subtle, fragmented, sometimes disturbing. In South Africa, hearths deep within caves hint at the coexistence of Homo naledi and early modern humans, long after both species should have been separated by time. In Indonesia, stone tools found at layers overlapping with Homo floresiensis suggest that modern humans arrived on Flores to find the island already inhabited. Some tools resemble floresiensis craftsmanship, others reflect styles typical of Homo sapiens. Did the two groups exchange ideas, compete, avoid each other entirely? The silence of the island offers no answers, only possibilities. More compelling signs emerge in Eurasia. At Denisova Cave in Siberia, scientists discovered the bones of a child whose mother was Neanderthal and father Denisovan. Not only did these two species meet, they formed families, and genetics reveals that such unions were not unusual. Multiple populations today carry fragments from Denisovans, Neanderthals, and at least one unknown lineage. These were not isolated encounters or accidents. They were part of a long, intertwined history among species who shared landscapes and, sometimes, lives. But interactions were not always peaceful. Some fossil bones bear cut marks and breaks consistent with conflict or resource competition. Others show signs of scavenging or opportunistic butchery. In a world where survival was never guaranteed, meetings between species could shift rapidly from curiosity to hostility. Territorial disputes, competition over prey, and differing survival strategies might have pushed fragile populations to collapse. Yet even the violent encounters tell a deeper truth. We were not alone, and the edges between us and them were far blurrier than we once believed. Still, the most haunting mystery is the total disappearance of these species. Their extinction is too complete, too synchronized across continents to be explained by natural causes alone. Their tools stop appearing. Their bones vanish from the record. Their landscapes are soon occupied entirely by Homo sapiens. Did we outcompete them through broader social networks, better communication, or superior adaptability? Or did we absorb them so thoroughly that their unique identities faded as their descendants became part of us? Some anthropologists think memory itself played a role. Early Homo sapiens might have preserved stories of other humans, stories of the little people, the forest dwellers, or the shadow beings that appear in indigenous legends around the world. These myths are often dismissed as imagination, yet their global distribution is suspiciously consistent. Could they be distorted echoes of real encounters, passed down through generations long after the last of these species had vanished? What is perhaps most unsettling is the possibility that we carry not just their genes, but their ideas. Innovations with unclear origins, like early fire use, symbolic marking, or long-distance tool transport, might have spread between species long before Homo sapiens became dominant. If so, the cognitive leap that eventually launched our global expansion may not have been ours alone. It may have been the final spark of a shared evolutionary mosaic, now lost to time. The fossil record remains stubbornly incomplete, the archaeological traces too thin to reconstruct full narratives. But the genetic evidence is unambiguous. We met these other humans, lived beside them, learned from them, and sometimes became one with them. Their disappearance did not erase them entirely. Their legacy walks the earth through us. And this realization forces a difficult question. If so many species once shared our world, how many more might have lived and died without leaving anything behind? Not even the faint whisper of a bone. Long before humanity built its first cities, long before writing transformed memory into history, stories of a world-ending flood were already spreading across cultures that had never met. Nearly every ancient society, from Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica, from the Aboriginal Dreamtime to the legends of the Pacific Islands, remembers a time when water rose to swallow the earth. These stories differ in detail but echo the same haunting theme: a world drowned, lives erased, and a new humanity emerging from the ruins. For centuries, scholars dismissed these tales as symbolic or mythological. But when geology, climate science, and archaeology converged, a startling realization emerged. The myths may not be myths at all. At the end of the last ice age, the planet underwent one of the most dramatic transformations in its history. Massive ice sheets melted at astonishing speed, releasing water volumes so immense they reshaped coastlines across the globe. Sea levels rose more than 120 meters. Entire continents were reduced. Thousands of islands were born, and coastlines raced inland faster than human populations could adapt. The earliest fishing villages, coastal camps, and migration routes all vanished beneath the rising oceans. If humanity had stories of a world lost to the sea, they were rooted in a reality so profound it scarred our collective memory. The most striking geological event of this era is known as Meltwater Pulse 1A, a rapid sea level rise nearly 14,600 years ago. In a span of just a few centuries, perhaps even decades, oceans around the world surged upward by nearly 20 meters. Such a rise would have devastated coastal settlements, forcing mass migrations inland. Archaeologists now believe that entire prehistoric cultures may have been erased during this event, leaving behind only traces found deep beneath the waves. For people living at that time, the sea would not have crept forward. It would have raced. But the flooding was not limited to coastlines. Retreating ice sheets released catastrophic glacial outburst floods across North America and Eurasia. Enormous lakes burst through natural dams, sending walls of water roaring across landscapes. The Missoula floods, for example, carved canyons, sculpted valleys, and reshaped entire regions of the Pacific Northwest in a matter of hours. Similar events in Northern Europe and Central Asia displaced countless animals and humans alike. These were not gentle floods, but apocalyptic torrents, capable of wiping out everything in their path. As scientists pieced together the evidence, the parallels with global flood myths became impossible to ignore. The Sumerian tale of Ziusudra, the Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh, the biblical Noah, the Hindu legend of Manu, the Greek story of Deucalion, all speak of sudden deluge, divine warnings, and the survival of only a few. Even indigenous Australian stories, which date back tens of thousands of years, describe rising seas swallowing ancestral lands. These are not isolated stories. They are memories, memories of a world shattered and reshaped by water. And yet the geological story grows stranger still. In some places, the flooding appears too sudden, too extreme to be explained by melting ice alone. Some scientists have proposed that massive comet fragments or atmospheric explosions may have destabilized ice sheets, accelerating their collapse. Others point to seismic activity, volcanic heating beneath glaciers, or shifts in Earth's climate system that triggered cascading failures. While the evidence remains debated, one thing is clear. The end of the Ice Age was not a slow thaw. It was a violent awakening. For early humans living through these events, the world would have become unrecognizable within a few generations. Shorelines they depended on for food disappeared overnight. Rivers changed course. Islands turned to mountains of water. And the trauma of losing everything, homes, territories, traditions, may have been passed down through oral stories until they became the foundational myths of human civilization. The flood stories survived, even when the people who lived through them did not. They are echoes of a time when the earth itself seemed determined to erase the past, forcing humanity into a new beginning. Even as the oceans rose and reshaped the world, another catastrophe may have struck, one far more sudden and violent than melting ice. Around 12,800 years ago, the planet plunged abruptly into a deep freeze known as the Younger Dryas, a climatic whiplash that reversed centuries of warming in a matter of years. Temperatures plummeted, ecosystems collapsed, megafauna, already weakened by environmental stress, disappeared en masse. Human cultures that had begun to flourish in the warming world suddenly found themselves facing a return to glacial conditions. For decades, scientists believed this shift was the result of natural climate variability, but fragments of evidence scattered across continents suggest a different possibility, a cosmic one. At dozens of archaeological and geological sites, researchers have found a layer of material unlike anything typically produced by earthly processes. Microscopic diamonds formed under intense pressure, magnetic spherules fused by extreme heat, melted glass droplets that require temperatures hotter than volcanic eruptions. These materials appear in the same sediment layers at sites across North America, Europe, and parts of the Middle East, all dating precisely to the onset of the Younger Dryas. It is as if something immense and fiery streaked across the sky, shattered, and ignited the world below. This has led to the controversial but increasingly compelling theory that Earth was struck by fragments of a disintegrating comet around 12,800 years ago. The idea is not that a single asteroid impacted the planet, but that multiple airbursts or surface explosions occurred across vast regions. Such events could have ignited wildfires on a continental scale, sent shockwaves through the atmosphere, vaporized animals, and destabilized ice sheets. If true, this cosmic disaster would explain the sudden cooling, the widespread extinctions, and the collapse of early human cultures that had just begun to flourish. Among the most affected were the Clovis people of North America, once believed to be the continent's earliest inhabitants. Their distinctive stone tools appear abruptly and disappear just as quickly. Some archaeologists attribute this disappearance to environmental stress as megafauna died out. Others now suspect a more catastrophic cause, a cosmic strike that incinerated landscapes and wiped out entire populations, leaving behind only burned soil and scattered remnants of a once thriving culture. But the mystery deepens when the timeline is compared across continents. Similar cultural disruptions occurred simultaneously in Europe and the Middle East, including the sudden abandonment of settlements and dramatic declines in population. In the Levant, the Natufian culture, one of the world's earliest semi-sedentary societies, collapsed abruptly, just as they were transitioning toward primitive agriculture. It is as though humanity was on the brink of a transformative shift when disaster struck, forcing people back into a nomadic lifestyle and delaying the dawn of civilization by centuries. The Younger Dryas event remains one of the most debated topics in modern archaeology. Critics argue that the evidence is circumstantial, that the strange materials could have other origins, or that climate shifts were already underway. But year after year, new sites add to the puzzle. Charcoal layers consistent with massive wildfires appear across multiple continents. Melted sediments show shock patterns not produced by natural burning. And ice cores from Greenland contain exotic particles that appear precisely at the boundary layer. If a cosmic impact did occur, its influence on human history would be immeasurable. It may have erased entire cultures before they could develop writing or monumental architecture. It may have forced migrations that reshaped genetic lineages. It may even have forged resilience and adaptability that later enabled agriculture, settlement, and the rise of civilization. Catastrophe, in this sense, was both destroyer and catalyst. Yet one question lingers above all others. If such a disaster struck just 12,800 years ago, a mere blink in human memory, how did the story vanish from our collective past? Did early survivors describe it in myths that later became metaphors? Did their descendants lose the details as oral traditions blurred into legend? Or was the event so traumatic, so overwhelming, that it defied description and instead lived on as the echo of a world-ending fire? Whatever the truth, the Younger Dryas stands as a reminder that humanity's path was never guaranteed. The stars above and the earth beneath have the power to erase entire histories, leaving us to rebuild in the aftermath, unaware of the worlds lost before our own. When you lay the pieces of human prehistory side by side, genetic bottlenecks, vanished species, submerged landscapes, sudden cultural leaps, abrupt technological collapses, unexplained extinctions, a strange and unmistakable pattern begins to emerge. It is not the neat progression taught in textbooks. It is something far more chaotic, fractured, and haunting. Our story is not a ladder climbing steadily upward, but a tapestry full of tears and missing threads, moments of illumination separated by long shadows. And within those shadows lie the most important questions about who we are. Across every continent and every era, the archaeological record shows the same rhythm: appearance, disappearance, reappearance. Knowledge rises unexpectedly, spreads briefly, then evaporates for thousands of years before returning as if discovered anew. Entire populations bloom into complexity, only to fade without obvious cause. Species appear fully formed with adaptations we struggle to explain. Others vanish so cleanly that only their genes betray their existence. Landscapes that once supported thriving communities are erased by ice, drowned by oceans, or scorched by cosmic fire. These are not isolated anomalies. They are recurring signatures. The genetic evidence tells a similar story. Waves of human expansion and contraction ripple across time, interwoven with migrations, extinctions, and interbreeding events that erased as much diversity as they created. Our DNA is a palimpsest, written, erased, overwritten, and written again. Within it lie ghosts of species we never met, traces of lineages that evolved separately for hundreds of thousands of years before merging into ours. We are hybrids, shaped by worlds we no longer recognize. And the most striking pattern of all is absence. Vast stretches of time where humans must have existed, learned, struggled, and innovated, yet left behind almost nothing. The archaeological silence is too consistent to be accidental. Whether caused by climate, geography, population collapse, or forces we have yet to understand, these gaps conceal chapters of human history so profound they could transform everything we think we know. Look closely at these gaps, and another possibility emerges: that humanity's development was not gradual, but punctuated. Our ancestors may have reached levels of complexity multiple times, only to lose them to droughts, floods, eruptions, ice advances, or the disappearance of key populations. Innovation may have spread along networks that later fractured. Technologies may have been shared between species that vanished before leaving robust fossil traces. Cultural memory may have been erased again and again as the world reshaped itself beneath their feet. The scattered brilliance of early humans, from symbolic art in Africa to seafaring in Australasia, from bone craftsmanship in Siberia to sophisticated hunting strategies in Europe, suggests that complex thought was never confined to a single moment or lineage. It flickered across time, sparking independently in different places only to be swallowed by environmental chaos or isolation. What we call the dawn of behaviorally modern humans may not have been a dawn at all, but the final surviving flame of many earlier fires. Even the disappearance of other human species fits the pattern. Their extinctions coincide with periods of upheaval that also destabilized Homo sapiens populations. Their presence may have driven innovation through competition or collaboration. Their loss may have erased entire bodies of knowledge. If humanity once lived in a crowded world of diverse minds, then the simplicity of today's human landscape is an anomaly, the result of millennia of narrowing, pruning, and forgetting. The more we learn, the more the gaps begin to look like mirrors reflecting the fragility of our existence. Civilizations rise and fall. Species flourish and fade. Knowledge grows, then vanishes when the people who hold it disappear. The rhythms of deep time do not care about continuity. They only care about survival. And woven through all these patterns is an unanswered question. If we can see the shadows of lost worlds in the fragments that remain, what might we discover if even one of those missing pages were restored? What truths about our origins lie just beyond reach, waiting beneath ice, beneath sea, beneath sediment, or hidden within our own genetic code? If everything we have uncovered, the lost species, the drowned continents, the vanished cultures, the cosmic fires, the forgotten technologies, points toward a deeper story of humanity, then the final truth must lie somewhere beyond the fragments we have managed to preserve. Our ancestors lived through ages we can barely imagine. Worlds of shifting ice and rising oceans, rival human species, catastrophic droughts, migrations across continents, and moments of brilliance extinguished before they could ignite lasting change. And yet, through all of this, one thread endured long enough to reach us: the human instinct to question, to search, to remember, even when the memories themselves are missing. But the deeper we look, the more that instinct becomes uneasy, as if probing a wound we do not fully understand. Human history is not merely incomplete. It feels intentionally obscured. Not by design, but by the sheer violence of deep time. The earth erases, the climate reshapes, the sky intervenes, and entire worlds disappear before they can root themselves in the archaeological record. What remains is a story written in negative space, where the most important events are the ones we cannot see. This is why the idea of a lost epoch resonates so strongly. It is not a single missing chapter, but a span of time so transformative and so thoroughly erased that it reshaped our species without leaving a clear trace. Was it a period when multiple human species interacted in ways our models cannot yet describe? A time when small, isolated populations developed unique technologies or symbolic systems that never survived environmental collapse? Were there migrations, bottlenecks, or brief flashes of complexity that ended before they began to spread? Or could it be something even stranger? An era when Homo sapiens were not the dominant force on Earth, but merely one among many, shaped by interactions with lineages that vanished before our story even began to form. These questions grow heavier when we consider how knowledge itself survives. Culture is fragile. Memory is perishable. A drought, a flood, a volcanic eruption, a single lost generation, each can erase centuries of accumulated understanding. Multiply this by hundreds of thousands of years, and the miracle is not that we lost so much history. The miracle is that anything survived at all. The archaeological record is a testimony not to what humans were, but to what could endure. Fire pits that escaped erosion, tools preserved by chance, bones buried in just the right soil. Everything else, the songs, rituals, fears, hopes, discoveries, relationships, migrations, extinctions, dissolved into silence. For every artifact we find, there were millions that vanished before they could speak. And so we arrive at the final unanswered question. What kind of humanity existed in the spaces between the evidence? Not the humanity we can measure, but the humanity we can only infer. The minds that understood fire long before the archaeological record acknowledges it. The hands that crafted tools in places now buried beneath oceans. The eyes that watched comets fall from the sky. The voices that told stories of other humans, taller, smaller, stranger, long before those species turned to dust. If even one of those lost worlds had endured long enough to shape a continuous tradition, would our species look the same today? Would civilization have begun earlier? Would we remember the other humans we once shared the earth with, not as myths, but as neighbors? Would we recognize ourselves in them, or would their existence force us to confront a more complex truth about what it means to be human? The greatest irony is that the answers may still exist. Beneath Antarctic ice, under submerged coastlines, deep inside caves untouched for hundreds of thousands of years, within genomes we have not yet sequenced, or perhaps in artifacts so anomalous we dismiss them because they do not fit the narrative we expect. Humanity is standing at the edge of a vast, unlit landscape, one shaped not by ignorance, but by absence. We cannot see what was once there, but we can feel its contours in every unexplained pattern, every missing lineage, every sudden leap in cognition, every echo of a species we never met, but still carry within us. The lost epoch may not stay lost forever, but until it reveals itself, we remain the descendants of a past we do not yet understand, walking forward with shadows behind us, shadows that may hold the real story of who we are.